Good evening. Tonight we descend into a story that will challenge everything you think you know about Down syndrome. What follows is a journey through misunderstanding, shadow scientific revelation, and the definition of humanity itself. Tonight we begin not with a disease, but with a mirror. A story whispered through the corridors of Victorian asylums, buried in ancient graves, and silenced by the gavel of eugenic laws. Forget the sanitized clinical terms you know today. The real history of Trisomy 21 did not begin under a microscope. It began in the trembling dark of human ignorance, where society first struggled to understand those who looked back at them with different eyes. We are entering a narrative that has been systematically erased. It is a ghost story populated by millions of faces that were hidden in attics, locked in basements, and erased from family trees. But it is also a detective story, a millennia-long investigation into the very architecture of what makes us human. Imagine, if you will, the silence of history. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of omission. For centuries, the individuals at the heart of our story were present in every village, every city, every empire. They walked the streets of Rome. They slept in the longhouses of the Vikings. They were painted onto the canvas of the Renaissance. Yet they were nameless. They were a question mark carved into the genetic code, a riddle that humanity was too frightened to solve. To understand their story, we must strip away the modern comfort of genetics. We must unlearn what we know about DNA, chromosomes, and proteins. We must step back into a world lit only by fire and superstition. We must go to the place where the nightmare began, not in hate, but in a desperate primal fear of the unknown. The year is 1483. We are deep in the shadowed heart of the Black Forest in what is now Germany. The winter here is not just a season, it is a predator. The wind howls through the ancient pines with a sound like tearing metal rattling the wooden shutters of a small, isolated peasant cottage. Inside, the air is thick, suffocatingly warm, smelling of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and the acrid smoke of a peat fire that refuses to burn cleanly. The darkness in the corners of the room feels heavy, almost liquid. In the center of this gloom sits a wooden cradle carved from rough oak polished smooth by the hands of generations. A mother stands over it. Her hands are cracked from the cold, her face gaunt with exhaustion. She is trembling, not from the chill, but from a terror that has been growing in her gut for weeks. She looks down at her newborn son. He is 3 months old, but he is different. She traces the line of his eyes. They slant upwards, reminiscent of the almond shape, distinct from her own distinct, from her husband's distinct from the 5 children who came before him. She touches the back of his neck. There's a looseness to the skin, a surplus of flesh that feels soft, terrifyingly soft under her calloused fingers. The baby does not cry. He lies in the cradle with a stillness that is unnerving. When he does make a sound, it is not the sharp, demanding wail of a hungry infant. It is a low, guttural hum. His tongue seems too large for his small mouth, protruding slightly dry and cracked. His muscles are fluid, lacking the tension of life. When she lifts him, he feels like a doll made of rag and sand slumping against her chest. In the 21st century, a doctor would gently explain hypotonia, low muscle tone. They would point out the epicanthic folds. They would speak of chromosomes. But in 1483, in this flickering darkness, there is no biology. There's only the supernatural. The mother pulls her shawl tighter. She remembers the stories whispered by the village elders, the warnings passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. The stories of the Wechselball, the Changeling. The legend says that the spirits of the forest, the fae, the dwarves, the creatures of the hollow hills are envious of human vitality. They come in the dead of night, slipping through the keyhole, sliding down the chimney. They steal the true baptized human child and spirit him away to their underground kingdom to become a servant. And in his place, they leave an effigy, a glamour, a creature that looks like a baby but is actually an ancient soulless thing, a keelcroft. A mass of flesh without a spirit. The mother stares into the eyes of her son and wonders, "Are you mine, or are you a monster wearing my son's skin?" This was the prevailing diagnosis of the medieval world for Down syndrome. It was not a medical condition, it was a demonic theft. And the cure for a changeling was brutal. The folklore demanded that the mother torture the imposter to force the spirits to return her real child. Imagine the horror of this reality. The mother, driven by grief and the desperate hope of retrieving her real baby, would take this infant, this child who needed extra care, extra warmth, and subject him to agony. She might heat a shovel in the fire until it glowed red and hold it near the baby's face, screaming for the dwarves to come back. She might take the baby to the frozen river and dunk him into the icy, black water, believing that a spirit would float while a human would scream. Or she might try the brewing test, a cruel trick where she would boil water in eggshells pretending to brew beer, hoping to surprise the ancient spirit hiding inside the baby into speaking, thus revealing his true age. Now listen closely to the silence of that cottage. The tragedy here is not just the physical abuse, it is the psychological severance. This child born with a need for profound connection is viewed as an enemy invader in the heart of the family. History records a moment from this very era involving the theologian Martin Luther. It is said he was presented with a 12-year-old boy who likely had Down syndrome. The boy could not speak, only hum and crave food. Luther, a man of God, looked at this child and saw no soul. He reportedly said that such children were massa carnis, a mass of flesh without spirit inhabited by the devil. He suggested that suffocating such a child would not be a sin but a mercy. Think of the weight of that judgment. From the pulpit, from the highest authorities of faith, the decree was handed down. This is not human. The wind continues to howl outside the cottage. The fire dies down. The mother puts the child back in the cradle, but she does not rock him. She steps back, retreating into the shadows, leaving the infant alone in the dark. The gap between them is only a few feet, but in her mind, it is an ocean. This was the first chapter of their history, a chapter written in fear, a chapter where the very features that define the syndrome, the gentleness, the unique appearance, the silence, were twisted into evidence of malice. Before science gave it a name, before we had the language of genetics, we called this mystery a curse. We called it a changeling. We called it a punishment. But as the centuries turned, the firelight of the superstitious cottage would fade. The world was waking up. The Enlightenment was coming. The spirits of the forest were retreating, but they were being replaced by something colder, sharper, and perhaps even more dangerous. The age of observation was beginning, and the child in the cradle was about to be moved from the myth into the museum. Where did this nightmare begin? It began here in the inability to recognize ourselves in the face of the other. But the story does not stay in the dark. It moves, it travels, it survives. Time is a sediment. It buries the truth under layers of soilstone and silence. But biology is stubborn. It leaves a mark that cannot be eroded by the turning of centuries. If we leave the dark cottage of the medieval forest and ascend drifting high above the timeline of human civilization, we see a pattern emerging from the noise, a persistent quiet rhythm in the genetic drumbeat of our species. The child in the cradle was not an anomaly of the Middle Ages. He was not a singular mistake of the 15th century. He was part of a lineage that stretches back to the very moment humanity stood upright. Trisomy 21 is as old as the first division of the first human cell. It walked out of Africa with us. It crossed the ice bridges of the Paleolithic era. It sat by the fires of the Neanderthals. It is not a modern disease. It is an ancient companion. Let us descend now into the damp earth of Leicestershire, England. The year's 2001, but the ground we are disturbing belongs to the 9th century. The air smells of wet clay and decaying roots. An archaeologist's trowel scrapes against something hard. A sound like a dry cough in the silence of the grave. They brush away the dirt of 1,000 years to reveal a skull. It is small. The cranium is broad and short. The teeth are crowded. To the untrained eye, it is just bone. But to the forensic anthropologist, it is a biography written in calcium. This was a child perhaps 9 years old. But look closer. Look at how the child lies. He is not thrown into a pit. He is not discarded in a rubbish heap, as the cursed often were. He is buried within the holy perimeter of a Saxon church. He is laid on his back, his arms crossed over his chest, in a posture of eternal rest. He faces the east, waiting for the rising sun of the resurrection. Feel the tenderness in this soil. Someone dug this grave. Someone washed this body. Someone wept over this broad, flat face. In an era of brutality where life was short and cheap, this child was cherished. Here the mystery was not named Changeling. It was named Beloved. It suggests that while the theologians debated the soul, the mothers and fathers simply loved. Now let the scene dissolve. The gray skies of England melt into the humid, verdant heat of the Mexican Gulf Coast. We travel back 3,000 years, The air is heavy with the scent of crushed orchids and rain. We stand before the colossal stone altars of the Olmec civilization. The Olmecs were the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the shadow kings who came before the Maya and the Aztec. They left behind jade figurines and massive basalt heads. Look at the faces carved into the green stone. The mouths are turned down in a perpetual somber curve. The eyes are slanted, heavy-lidded. The noses are flat. For decades, archaeologists called these figures were-jaguars, mythological hybrids of man and beast. But look again. Strip away the mythology. What you are seeing is a stylized, reverent depiction of Down syndrome. Some anthropologists whisper a compelling theory that to the Olmecs, these individuals were not broken. They were bridges. Their unique appearance, their lack of aggression, their eternal innocence, these were seen as traits of the divine. They were the jaguar people, powerful spiritual conduits. Here the genetic accident was not a defect. It was an elevation. They were closer to the gods than the rest of us. History is a kaleidoscope. Turn the lens and the image changes. From the demon to the beloved, from the beloved to the god. Move forward now. The Renaissance. Italy, 1460. The studio of Andrea Mantegna smells of turpentine, linseed oil, and dust. The artist stands before a canvas, his brush hovering. He's painting the Madonna and Child. He wants realism. He wants to capture the raw, unfiltered truth of the human form. He paints the infant Jesus, but he does not paint a generic, idealized cherub. He paints a specific face he has seen in the market squares of Mantua. Look at the painting today. The child's tongue protrudes slightly. The eyes are widely spaced. The pinky finger curves inward clinodactyly. Mantegna unknowingly has created one of the earliest clinical records of Down syndrome. He placed the face of a child with Trisomy 21 on the savior of the world. For 500 years, worshippers have bowed before this image, praying to a representation of a genetic syndrome they would later come to pity or revile. Yet despite these echoes in art and earth, a thick fog of confusion blanketed the minds of the learned men. For millennia, humanity could not solve the puzzle. Imagine the confusion of a doctor in 17th century London or a philosopher in ancient Athens. They observed a phenomenon that defied the laws of blood. In a world obsessed with lineage where a smith looked like a smith and a tutor looked like a tutor, these children broke the rules. A child born to a fisherman in Scotland bore a haunting, undeniable resemblance to a child born to a silk merchant in Japan. They looked more like each other than they did their own brothers and sisters. They were a phantom family, a secret tribe scattered across the globe, bound not by blood, but by a mysterious biological signature. The scholars whispered in the lecture halls. What connects them? They had no microscopes powerful enough to see the chromosomes, so they invented ghosts. They blamed the stars, they blamed the moon, they blamed the mother's imagination. The theory of maternal impression held sway for centuries. The belief that if a pregnant woman was startled by a rabbit, her child would have a hare lip. If she looked too long at a painting of a strange face, her child would take that shape. The mother was always the culprit. Her thoughts, her sins, her fears, she was the vessel that warped the clay. And so the child with Down syndrome remained a cipher, a blank screen onto which society projected its anxieties. To the superstitious, a monster. To the grieving, a mystery. To the artist, a muse. But the world was hardening. The romantic mists of the past were evaporating. The Industrial Revolution was grinding into motion. Steam engines were screaming, factories were rising, and the chaotic, organic world of the village was being replaced by the grid of the city. We are leaving the era of the myth. We are entering the era of the measurement. The child is about to be taken from the home and placed into the institution. The phantom family is about to be given a name, but it will be the wrong name. A name born of racism and bad science. A name that will hang around their necks like a millstone for 100 years. The fog is lifting, but what it reveals is not freedom. It is a cage. The 19th century does not dawn with the sun. It dawns with the furnace. We leave the quiet graves of the Saxons and the misty studios of the Renaissance behind. We enter an age of iron and steam. The air turns gray with the soot of 1,000,000 chimneys. The world is accelerating. The Industrial Revolution has arrived, and with it a new obsession order. Everything must be measured. Everything must be weighed. Everything must be categorized. The chaos of nature is being tamed by the rigid lines of the ledger book. In this new world, there's no place for the village idiot who wanders freely. There's no place for the wholly innocent. If a cog does not fit the machine, it must be removed. We find ourselves in the rolling green hills of Surrey, England, in the year 1855. But the landscape is dominated by a shadow, the Royal Earlswood Asylum for Idiots. The name strikes the modern ear like a physical blow. But breathe in the air of this place, smell the carbolic acid, the beeswax polish, the damp wool, and the underlying faint scent of unwashed bodies. To the Victorians, this was not a prison. It was a palace of benevolence. It was a triumph of charity. The building is a Gothic monolith, endless corridors of cold stone, high windows that let in light but offer no view of the world below. It is a warehouse for the broken minds of the empire. Here, hundreds of inmates live out their days in a regimented silence broken only by the bells that signal waking, eating, and sleeping. Walking these halls is a man of quiet intensity, Dr. John Langdon Down. He is 37 years old. He's a man of science, a man of compassion, and a man of his time. He looks at the chaotic mass of humanity in his care, the epileptics, the hydrocephalics, the trauma victims, and he feels a desperate need to make sense of the confusion. He is a botanist of human nature, trying to sort the species in his garden. He invites us into his study. The walls are lined with leather-bound books. On his desk sit brass calipers measuring tapes and silver photography plates. Dr. Down is possessed by the scientific zeitgeist of the Victorian-era race. In the 19th century, race was not just about skin color. It was the primary lens through which all human existence was viewed. The theories of Johann Blumenbach taught that the Caucasian, the white European, was the pinnacle of evolution, the perfect standard. All other races, the Ethiopian, the Malay, the American Indian, the Mongolian, were considered degenerations from that perfect ideal. Steps down the ladder, Dr. Down gathers a specific group of his patients. He stands them against the wall. He measures the circumference of their heads. He measures the distance between their eyes. He observes the texture of their skin. He notices a pattern, a distinct repeating set of physical traits in a subset of his patients. The broad face, the flat bridge of the nose, the upward slant of the eyes, the epicanthic fold of the eyelid. He looks at these children born to white English parents in the heart of Surrey, and he sees the face of a different continent. In 1866, he picks up his pen. The scratch of the nib against the paper is the sound of a lock clicking shut. He writes a paper titled Observations on an Ethnic Classification of Idiots. Listen to his logic. It is the logic of a tragedy. He writes, a very large number of congenital idiots are typical Mongols. So marked is the resemblance that when placed side by side, it is difficult to believe that the specimens compared are not children of the same parents. He theorizes that these children are reversions. He believes that the parents, perhaps due to tuberculosis or exhaustion or alcoholism, had lost the generative power to create a Caucasian child. The biological energy failed and the child slid down the evolutionary ladder, landing on the rung of the Mongolism. The word is born. It travels from his notebook to the medical journals, from the journals to the doctor's offices, and from the offices to the terrified parents. Consider the devastation of this label. In a society obsessed with racial purity and imperial superiority, to be told that your child is a Mongol is not just a medical diagnosis. It is a moral indictment. It implies that your bloodline has corrupted. It implies that you have given birth to a foreigner, a primitive, a being that is biologically lesser than yourself. Dr. Down intended to classify. Instead, he stigmatized. Yet we must be careful with our judgment. John Langdon Down was not a villain. In the paradox of history, he was actually a progressive. He argued against the slavery supporters of his time. He used this theory to prove that all humans were related, that if a white woman could give birth to a Mongol, then the human family was one species, not separate creations. He treated his patients with a kindness that was rare for the age. He noted their humor. He noted their stubbornness. He praised their mimicry and their love of music. He built a theater in the asylum so they could perform plays. He argued that they could learn that they had feelings, that they were not empty shells. But the world did not hear his compassion. The world only heard his classification. The nuances of his affection were lost. The label Mongoloid hardened into a slur. It stripped the individual of their uniqueness and turned them into a representative of a failed race. As the 19th century bleeds into the 20th, the atmosphere in the asylum changes. The paternalism of Dr. Down dies with him. The industrial machine grinds on, and a new colder generation of scientists takes the stage. They look at the Mongol, and they do not see a reversion to be pitied and protected. They see a threat. The calipers are put away. The ledgers are closed. The era of observation is ending. The doctors are no longer looking at the shape of the eyes. They are looking at the cost of the life. They are calculating the burden on the state. The shadows in the corners of the asylum are growing longer. Outside the gates, a new word is being whispered in the universities of London, New York, and Berlin. A word that promises to clean up the mess of human genetics. Eugenics. The child with Down syndrome is about to be moved from the category of curiosity to the category of target. The nightmare is no longer about fairies or changelings. It is about to become organized, legalized, and efficient. The air grows frigid. We are no longer in the dusty, book-lined study of a Victorian doctor. That room with its misguided curiosity is gone. We have stepped into a sterile, sharp-edged world of polished wood marble floors and surgical steel. The 20th century has arrived, and with it a new religion. It is not preached from a pulpit, but from the lecture halls of Harvard, Yale, and Oxford. It is called eugenics. The word comes from the Greek eugenes, well-born. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like a promise. Ideally, it meant improving the human race. But in practice, it meant gardening. And to a gardener, the difference between a flower and a weed is a decision of life and death. The child with Down syndrome is no longer a mongoloid curiosity. They are now a defective, a menace, a drain on the reservoir of the state. Listen to the language of this era. It is not the language of care. It is the language of contamination. Scientists speak of germplasm and bad stock. They create charts that look like family trees, but the branches are painted black to signify the feeble-minded. We find ourselves in a courtroom in the United States. The year's 1927, the Supreme Court. The air's thick with the scent of tobacco smoke and old law books. A gavel hits the sound block. Crack. It sounds like a bone breaking. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., a man celebrated for his intellect, looks down at a case file involving a woman deemed feeble-minded. He delivers a sentence that will echo through history like a gunshot. It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. With those words, the floodgates open. Across America, the unfit are rounded up. In state hospitals, young women and men, many with Down syndrome or similar developmental delays, are wheeled into operating rooms. They are not there to be healed. They are there to be cut. Tubal ligations, vasectomies, performed often without consent, sometimes without knowledge. They are told it is for an appendix or a hernia. They wake up empty. The state has decided that their genetic code stops with them. But if America provided the legal blueprint, Europe built the factory. The shadow lengthens. It stretches across the Atlantic and falls over Berlin. The year's 1939. The Nazis are in power. They have obsessed over the American eugenics books. They admire the efficiency, but they find sterilization too slow. We stand on Tiergartenstrasse 4, a nondescript villa in the center of Berlin. Inside, bureaucrats in gray suits are not planning a war on the battlefield. They are planning a war on the cradle. This is the T4 program. The order comes down from Hitler himself. It is backdated to the start of the war to cover the crime in the fog of chaos. The decree authorizes certain doctors to grant a mercy death, nad and tod, to patients considered incurable. The first victims are not Jewish people. They are not political prisoners. They are children, infants and toddlers with physical and mental disabilities. Children with Down syndrome are at the top of the list. Imagine the scene. It is quiet. A gray bus with windows painted over to prevent anyone from looking in or looking out rolls up to a pediatric clinic. The parents are told their children are being taken to special treatment centers for advanced therapy. They are told there are new medicines, new hope. The bus drives away. It does not go to a hospital. It goes to a killing center. At facilities like Hartheim and Hadamar, the machinery of death is tested. These children become the canaries in the coal mine of the Holocaust. The gas chambers, the crematoriums, they are calibrated using the lungs and bodies of the disabled. For those not gassed, there is a slower, quieter method. The special diet. In the wards of Kaufbeuren, nurses women who trained to save lives mix the food. They reduce the calories to nearly zero. They remove the fat, the protein. They feed the children a watery vegetable broth that fills the stomach but provides no fuel. Day by day, the children fade. They stop playing. Then they stop sitting up. Then they stop breathing. It is murder by neglect designed to look natural on a death certificate. Pneumonia, the paper says. Heart failure. The parents receive an urn. They are told it was a tragedy. They are not told that their child was starved to protect the genetic purity of the Reich. Feel the weight of this ash. This was the nadir of human morality, the philosophy of life unworthy of life. It was the ultimate rejection of the mystery we saw in the Saxon grave. There the difference was beloved. Here the difference is a capital crime. More than 200,000 disabled people were murdered. A generation of smiles, of quirks, of laughter erased, because they did not fit the template of the master race. The silence that falls over Europe in 1945 is heavy. The smoke clears, but the stain remains. The eugenic laws in America and Sweden will remain on the books for decades more. The idea that these individuals are errors is deeply retrenched in the medical mind. But history is strange. Even in the deepest dark, a light can flicker. While the bureaucrats were trying to delete these children from existence, a different group of people was beginning to look closer. Not with a desire to kill, but with a burning need to understand. The war ends. The focus shifts. We are leaving the courtroom and the gas chamber. We are entering a room that smells of glass and electricity. The calipers are gone. Now we need a microscope. The answer to the mystery is waiting. It has been hiding in plain sight for 50,000 years, coiled tight in the center of the cell. Paris, 1958. The war is over. The smoke has cleared from the battlefields and the world is rebuilding. But in the quiet corridors of medicine, the old ghosts still linger. The textbooks still speak of Mongolism. The doctors still speak of racial regression. The parents still carry the crushing weight of a guilt that tells them they have sinned or that their blood is tainted. But the answer was never in the bloodline. It was deeper. It was waiting in a world so small that the human eye had never truly seen it. We enter the hospital trousseau. The atmosphere here is different. It does not smell of fear or carbolic acid. It smells of hot glass, of sharp chemical fixatives, and the electric ozone of new machinery. In a small, cramped laboratory, a woman sits hunched over a microscope. Her name is Marthe Gautier. She is a cardiologist, but she has returned from America with a new technique, a new way of looking at the building blocks of life. Beside her are samples of tissue taken from children with the syndrome. For decades, scientists believed that the human cell contained 48 chromosomes. It was a number carved in stone, a dogma. To question it was to question gravity. But the old techniques were clumsy. The chromosomes were always clumped together, a tangled knot of genetic yarn that could not be untied. Marthe Gautier does something revolutionary. She introduces a simple ingredient to the slide: water, a hypotonic solution. It is a gentle shock. Under the lens, the cells drink in the water. They swell. They expand. And like a flower blooming in fast motion, the nucleus bursts open. The tangled knot unravels. The chromosomes float apart, separated distinct clear against the backlight. She stains them with blue dye. She looks through the eyepiece. The silence in the room is absolute. She begins to count. 1, 2, 3. She pairs them up, large to small, the giants of the genome down to the tiny specks. She counts 46. That is the new number for humanity recently discovered. But on this slide, in the cell of this child, there is a straggler, an extra guest at the table, 47. She counts again. She calls in her colleague, Jérôme Lejeune. They look together. They photograph the slide. They cut the photograph apart with scissors and arrange the pieces on a table. There, at the very bottom of the genetic ladder, is one of the smallest chromosomes. Chromosome 21. Usually it stands alone with its partner. A perfect pair. But here there are 3. Trisomy. In that moment, the Mongol vanished. The changeling vanished. The racial degenerate vanished. In their place stood a biological reality. Let us step inside the cell to understand this moment. Not with the dry language of a textbook, but with the awe it deserves. Imagine the genesis of life, the process of meiosis. It is a celestial dance. The chromosomes line up in the center of the dividing cell, holding hands with their partners. The music stops. They are supposed to pull apart to travel to opposite poles of the New World, ensuring that the egg and the sperm each carry exactly half the map. But nature is not a machine. It is organic. It is prone to the occasional stutter. In the creation of the egg that became this child, the pair of chromosome 21 held on too tight. It was a lover's embrace that refused to break. This is called non-disjunction. When the cell divided, both copies traveled together into the new dawn. When the sperm arrived with its single copy, the math changed. 2 + 1, 3. This tiny microscopic book of instructions, chromosome 21, is responsible for overproduction. It is an overdose of life. It creates an excess of certain proteins. It tells the eyes to shape themselves differently. It tells the heart to build its walls with a slight variation. It softens the muscles. It accelerates the aging of cells. This was not a sin of the mother. It was not a curse of the father. It was a typo in the manuscript of life. A random, chaotic event that could happen to a queen, or a pauper, a saint, or a sinner. The discovery published by Lejeune, Gautier, and Turpin in 1959 was an earthquake. It was the first time in history that a disability was linked to a chromosomal anomaly. Suddenly, the parents were absolved. It wasn't their bad blood. It wasn't their hidden vice. It was a roll of the cosmic dice. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. Science had explained the what, but it had not yet fixed the how. The diagnosis was now precise, but the life of the child was still trapped in the old world. The microscope had liberated the diagnosis, but the children were still locked behind the walls of the institutions. The glass slide was clean, but the reality on the ground was about to get dirty. Science had done its part. Now it was time for the human spirit to fight. The era of the laboratory was ending. The era of the revolution was about to begin. And it would start in the most unlikely of places, a hellhole on Staten Island called Willowbrook. The microscope slide was clean. The chromosome was beautiful in its clarity. But the world outside the laboratory was rotting. While scientists in Paris were celebrating the discovery of Trisomy 21, thousands of children living with it were rotting in the dark. We leave the sterile light of science and descend into the mid-century nightmare. The year is 1965. We are in the United States, the land of the free. But there is a city within a city on Staten Island, New York, where freedom does not exist. Willowbrook State School. It looks like a college campus from the air brick building's green lawns. But walk closer. The windows are barred. The air around the buildings is heavy, carrying a stench that makes visitors gag before they even cross the threshold. It was built to house 4,000 people. By 1965, it holds over 6,000. Walk through the doors of Ward 33. The smell hits you like a physical wall. A suffocating cocktail of urine, feces, industrial bleach, and unwashed sweat. The noise is deafening. It is a cacophony of moan screams and the slapping of bare feet on cold tile. There are no toys here. There are no books. There are no teachers. There are only attendants overwhelmed and underpaid, tasked with herding human beings like livestock. Children with Down syndrome sit naked on the floor, rocking back and forth, their skin covered in sores. They are not insane. They are bored. They are starving for stimulation. They are starving for touch. In this warehouse of neglected souls, the state did not just abandon them, it used them. Darkness has many layers. At Willowbrook, there was a layer deeper than neglect. There was experimentation. Doctors respected men in white coats, looked at these children and saw laboratory rats. Hepatitis was rampant in the filth of the wards, so they made a decision that chills the soul. They intentionally infected healthy children with the virus. They mixed the feces of infected children into milkshakes and fed it to new arrivals. Their justification, they were going to get it anyway. They wanted to study the disease to create a vaccine. They traded the health of the vulnerable for the knowledge of the powerful. It was the logic of the eugenicist, alive and well in the age of the Beatles. But silence cannot hold forever. 1972, a young reporter named Geraldo Rivera obtains a key. He sneaks a camera crew inside. The footage is grainy black and white, but the horror is high definition. The world turns on its television sets and sees the truth. They see children Americans lying in their own waste. They see a child with Down syndrome, beautiful and terrified, curling into a ball on a hard bench. Rivera speaks to the camera, his voice shaking. This is what it looked like. This is what it sounded like. But how can I tell you about the smell? It was a shock to the conscience of the world. But the real revolution did not come from the TV screen. It came from the kitchen table. A new generation of parents was rising. These were not the parents of the 1920s shamed into silence. These were the parents of the civil rights era. They saw the footage, and they saw their own children. They refused to listen to the doctors who said, "Put him away and forget him." They organized, they filed lawsuits, they marched. They demanded that the Constitution applied to everyone, even those with 47 chromosomes. The case New York ARC versus Rockefeller shattered the system. The courts ruled that you cannot simply warehouse human beings. If the state takes custody, it must provide treatment. It must provide education. The gates of Willowbrook began to rust. The doors groaned open. It was a messy, chaotic exodus. The deinstitutionalization had begun. The children flooded out of the shadows and into the sunlight of the streets. They went back to their families. They went to group homes. And most shockingly of all, they went to school. The experts had said they were unteachable. The experts said their IQs were fixed at the level of an infant. The experts were wrong. When these children were given pencils, they learned to write. When they were given books, they learned to read. When they were given love, they blossomed. In the span of a single generation, the average IQ of a person with Down syndrome appeared to jump 20 points. Their brains had not changed. Their world had. The asylum was dead. The Mongol was dead. The citizen was born. But as the institutions crumbled, a new challenge was quietly assembling itself. The medical revolution that saved their hearts would soon grant the power to stop their hearts before they ever beat. We are leaving the era of the cage. We are entering the era of the choice. We arrive in the present day. The landscape has transformed. The dark forests of the Changeling are gone. The cold stone of the asylum has been demolished. In their place stands a world of glass, steel, and miracle. Consider the heart. For generations, the heart was the clock that counted down the life of a child with Down syndrome. Born with holes in the chambers with valves that leaked, these children often faded before they reached double digits. In 1983, the average life expectancy was just 25 years, a blink of an eye. But then the scalpel moved. Step into the sterile cool of a modern operating theater. The air is filtered. The lights are blindingly bright. A surgeon, hands steady as stone, works on a heart the size of a plum. In the past, this child would have been sent home to die naturally. Today, the defect is stitched closed. The clock is rewound. The result is a demographic that has never existed in the history of our species, the elder. Look around. You see them now. Men and women with Down syndrome, with gray hair, with wrinkles, with reading glasses. They are retiring from jobs. They are outliving their parents. They are navigating the complexities of grief, romance, and aging. Science has granted them time, but the same science that extended the hand of friendship has now reached into the womb with a question. The technology has evolved. It is no longer about the physical asylum. It is about the digital filter. Enter the era of NIPT, non-invasive prenatal testing. It is a marvel of engineering. A simple vial of blood drawn from a pregnant mother's arm. Inside that blood float tiny fragments of DNA from the fetus, ghostly signals drifting in the maternal stream. Machines read these signals. They look for the extra weight of chromosome 21. The diagnosis comes early. It comes quietly. It comes in a sterile envelope or a secure email. And with it, the choice. We must look to the north, to Iceland, to Denmark. In these advanced, compassionate societies, the birth rate of children with Down syndrome has plummeted to near zero. It is not because the mutation has stopped happening. The celestial dance of meiosis still stumbles. Non-disjunction still occurs. But the cradles are empty. In Iceland, nearly 100% of pregnancies with a positive diagnosis are terminated. The screening is universal. The decision is private. The result is a societal silence. We are witnessing a paradox that defines the modern age. On the surface, we have never been more inclusive. We see actors with Down syndrome on Netflix. We see models on the runway. We cheer for them at the Special Olympics. We pass laws to protect their rights to work and live. But underneath, in the privacy of the doctor's office, we are systematically filtering them out of the human family. This is not the violent eugenics of the Nazis. There are no gray buses. There are no forced injections. This is soft eugenics driven by individual choice, by the fear of the unknown, by the desire for a perfect child. It leaves us with a haunting question. As we gain the power to edit the human genome, to select the traits we value, what happens to the traits we don't? We are curating humanity. We are weeding the garden. But in removing the weed, are we also removing the soil that holds us together? Researchers studying the families of those with Down syndrome report something counterintuitive. They report higher levels of patience. They report a different perspective on what constitutes a successful life. They speak of a unique form of emotional intelligence, an unfiltered ability to connect, to forgive, to be present. If this population disappears, that frequency of human vibration disappears with them. We will have a world that is smarter, faster, and more efficient. But will it be colder? We stand on a precipice. The technology is here. The choice is ours. The child with Down syndrome has survived the myth, the asylum, and the gas chamber. But can they survive our pursuit of perfection? The final chapter of their history is being written right now, and it is being written in the silence of our own hearts. And so we return to where we began, not to the dark cottage of the Middle Ages, nor to the cold stone of the asylum, but to the silence of the microscopic world. Focus your mind one last time on that third chromosome, chromosome 21. It is such a small thing, a twist of protein, a speck of stardust caught in a biological web. To the unthinking universe, it is nothing more than a chemical stutter, a copy error in the grand library of life. But to us, to the human species, that single extra strand has been a mirror. For 50,000 years we have looked into the face of Trisomy 21, and we have seen our own reflection. When we were fearful, we saw monsters. When we were cruel, we saw life unworthy of life. When we were arrogant, we saw a biological mistake that needed to be erased. But when we were quiet, when we allowed ourselves to be humble, we saw something else. We saw that the definition of human is not defined by an IQ score. It is not defined by the symmetry of a face. It is not defined by the speed at which we can run the race of modern life. The history of Down syndrome is not a history of a disease. It is a history of our own morality. It has been a litmus test for the civilization we have built. Every era was judged by how it treated the most vulnerable among them. And for most of history, we failed that test. We locked them away because they reminded us of something we are desperate to forget: our own fragility. We build our cities, our economies, and our philosophies on the idea that we are masters of our destiny, that we are perfectible, that we can engineer a world without weakness. But the third chromosome reminds us that biology is wild. It reminds us that we are all, every single one of us, walking a tightrope over an abyss of genetic chaos. We are all temporary. We are all imperfect. To eliminate the imperfect is to eliminate the very thing that makes us resilient. A forest with only one type of tree dies in the first blight. A society with only one type of mind dies of its own rigidity. The individuals with Down syndrome who walk among us today, the survivors of the T4 programs, the survivors of Willowbrook, the survivors of the prenatal screen, they are the teachers we did not know we needed. They slow us down. They demand patience in a world addicted to speed. They offer affection in a world addicted to transaction. They show us that a life lived with difference is not a life lived in deficit. As we stand at the gates of the genetic revolution, with the power to edit the code of life in our hands, we must ask ourselves, what are we chasing? If we scrub the human genome clean of every error, every variation, every mistake, we may find that we have scrubbed away the soul of our species. We may find that in our quest to become gods, we have ceased to be human. The mystery of the third chromosome was never about what they are. It was always about who we are. They have been with us since the first sunrise. They have endured the darkness of our ignorance. They have forgiven the cruelty of our fear. They are still here waiting for us to catch up. Perhaps the extra chromosome is not a burden. Perhaps it is an anchor holding us to the ground, keeping us human in a world that is trying to fly too close to the sun. Look at the mirror one last time. The face looking back is not a stranger. It is us.